but I'll carry on. So who was I going to be speaking to? Who was I going to be aiming to impact? And I thought very carefully about the sector, the early years sector, and who dominated, whose voices were heard, and whose funds of knowledge, whose cultural capital were we logging into. Thinking about the Black Nursery Manager training and consultancy and the anti-racist work that I do within the sector, I'm very sector specific and I stick to early years. I think about that 0 to 5 bracket very intentionally, because I know in that space, I am one of a few Black early years educators that is talking about how the global majority is positioned. So between 2004 and 2020, last year, I was the manager of Edgbaston Park Day Nursery. Some of you who are in the room who are from Birmingham will know that nursery. You will know that my name before it was Pemberton was Kerr. You will know that that nursery was the hub of the community. It was colloquially known as the Black Nursery, hence why I called myself, as I said, the Black Nursery Manager. And it was a hub. It was a place where children and families came to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel appreciated. And I really had a big focus on school readiness, whatever that meant. I had a big belief in the preparation and the necessity for a level of preparation for school, but not in the way that Ofsted saw it. So my school readiness program was about absolute, undeniable self-belief. It was about ensuring that those children felt excellent, even when the world told them that they weren't. It was about having an absolute sense of Black pride. And it was about ensuring that they knew that they had a voice that was valued and could be heard. So I took over the running of the business from my mother in 2004. We had 2 other nurseries, so there were 3 in total. But there was a time when we had a nursery in Handsworth as well. So when we thought about where the nurseries were located, we thought really carefully about that, because we knew also the world was watching and the local communities were watching. So of course, the name Edgbaston Park Day Nursery is because the nursery was in Edgbaston. To be specific, on Rotten Park Road, those of you who know the city know that Rotten Park Road becomes this kind of barrier. It's a crossroads, if you like, and you walk in one direction and you've got City Road, you've got Dudley Road, you walk in the other direction and you've got Norfolk Road and Highfield Road. So I often make the intentional delineation, and I call it Edgbaston or Edgbaston. And I do that to let people know I was aware of where the nursery was situated. Yes, it was leafy. Yes, it was suburban. Yes, it was quite quiet. However, when my children and families arrived to the nursery every day at 7:30, music was playing. We came with our full selves and we were happy to be there. And I always greeted my children and families with that level of joy and excellence and excitement, because I was excited to have them. And I wanted those children to feel that too. I wanted those families to feel that too. What had happened throughout my journey as a nursery manager was that I decided to take a few years out to go and qualify as a secondary school teacher. And that was because I wanted to see who was coming into the sector. I knew that the people that were teaching, the practitioners that were going to be joining me at some point, would not have sector specific experience, and certainly not current sector specific experience. So they were, fundamentally teaching out of a textbook. So when I came in to teach childcare, health and social care, and drama, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody who's listening to me talk, it was really to kind of have a look at what was going on. And I taught at Hillcrest School, again, those of you who are from Birmingham, in Bartley Green. It's a girls' school, predominantly Black and brown young people, with a teaching staff which was predominantly white. So again, these same things were coming up in terms of questions I was asking myself: who was coming into the sector and who was preparing these young people to come into this workforce? I thought about the fact that the legacy that I was going to be continuing at the nursery that my mother owned, it was important that I kept that at a certain standard and with a certain energy that continued to exude joy. But I knew that could only happen if I had the right people in the team. and who would work alongside for the joint, I guess, the joint and shared vision of what we wanted for those children and families who were not coming from Edgbaston. They were coming from Ladywood, and they were coming from Newtown, and they were coming from Handsworth and Handsworth Wood. They were coming from Lozells. They weren't coming from Edgbaston. So that's to kind of contextualize me before I go into speaking about what I did and why I did it and the ecosystem that surrounded that. So next slide, please. When I think about ecosystem, I think about all of these pictures that I'm presenting you here. The early years is often left out of the conversation. As much as we realize it is the foundation for any child's education, it's their first introduction into formal education, if you like, I thought very clearly and deeply about the intention of what I was doing. Throughout the 16 years that I managed, I thought about my ecosystem and what I had created, what I had ensured would continue based on what my mother had started in the late 80s with her first nursery, which was in Bearwood. So when I think about the ecosystem, I present to you some images that beautifully illustrate what we did and how we did it. So you will see the picture of the community. This community was gathered for the children's graduation, and we would do that every summer because we wanted to talk about transition. We wanted to make sure that these Black children that were coming to us were feeling a sense of pride before they left us and went into reception. Often we knew that that journey wasn't going to be straightforward. We often knew that the barriers that some of those children were going to be facing as they went into the miseducation system was going to be something we had to kind of prepare them for, but we didn't want to distract them. We didn't want them to focus on them being badly behaved, them being underachievers, them being the disproportionate amount of Black boys that would not succeed. And when I thought about Black boys, I thought really, really hard about Black boy joy. And that brings me on to that picture that you see of me and my godson, who was also a member of the nursery community. And this little boy had his absolute journey. This little boy started with me when he was 1 year old. He left me when he was 4 and a little bit. And he left me having been part of a group which would have been described as hard to manage, that would have been described as disadvantaged, would have been described as having behavioral issues, possibly ADHD, all sorts of labels were coming their way. But the sense of pride that you see in this little boy's face is not to be ignored. That he had got to 4 years at Edgbaston Park Day Nursery without being asked to leave, without being statemented, without having a level of intrusion from social workers, family support workers who didn't understand or didn't know him. We came together collaboratively within our ecosystem to ensure that he made it all of the way. And he is doing fantastically because we didn't give up. We relied on the ecosystem. I ensured that the culture that I curated in my setting spoke to thinking about a collaborative approach. As you move around the pictures, you will see chess tutor Asante. Again, anybody who's from Birmingham knows of the amazing work that Asante does. Asante would come in every week during the summer term to do chess with my preschool children. And when we kind of presented that to the parents, some of the parents were like, Liz, this isn't going to work. My child doesn't sit down for 3 minutes, let alone 20 minutes to think about chess or to even try and learn. What would happen was that Asante would engage them in a way which spoke to who they were. He would engage them in a way which allowed them to come in with their funds of knowledge, centralized in their identity, and thinking about the diaspora, thinking about where these Black children were coming from and what was going to engage them. And part of that made me really think about the structure of family and how family is central to what we do and why we do it. So you will see at the lower part of the slide, a young man whose face has got a heart and his son. And the story and the narrative and the importance and the value of me bringing in my young fathers was absolutely essential. It needed to happen. And this young man had just come out of prison. He had a really tough time. I'd known that young man from the community since he was 14. He had become a father, and when he had become a father, he had said to the mother of his son, there is only one place I'm sending my youth, and my youth is going to Lizzie's nursery, the end. And often that happened. I would meet young men at the door, and they would come with the mothers of their children and say, Liz, not long, my youth's coming here. That's fine, that's great, let's keep it moving. But what I wanted to do is that I wanted to make sure that these young men were part of their children's story in nursery, not just at home and not just in the community, but in the nursery. So seeing that picture of building blocks was very significant and very impactful, not only for me viewing it and as the person who took the picture, but also the reaction of the other Black boys that were in my preschool room at the time, who ran to this little boy's dad and hugged him, grabbed his legs, grabbed his arms, and played. They enjoyed the presence of this young man in the setting. So as I speak about little Black boys, of course, I want to think about what we did to empower little Black girls. And so you'll see the three amazing young women who are sitting here thinking about what's going on in their nursery day, 7:30 until 6 o'clock. All of these little girls here were at my nursery 7:29 and 30 seconds until 5:59 every day, because mom and dad had to work. And sometimes it wasn't just mom and dad who was picking them up. Some of you who are here will know you are grandparents. You take a role in ensuring that your children, your grandchildren, sorry, are involved in that legacy, because that's what family is about. It's about legacy and passing that on. So when I captured this picture of these three amazing young women, I also thought about the legacy of the families that they come from. And some of you may be here and are related to some of these children, people that you see. But it was really to kind of demonstrate to you that this was really a central focus of the ecosystem: community, family, engagement, and putting those people in the setting, not outside of it, in the setting. Moving on to my next slide. As well as obviously the ecosystem, we have to think about pedagogy. And when I thought about how we learn, how we introduce children thinking about who they are, it's collaborative. I knew that about the pedagogy that I'd instilled, that my team would instill. I knew that it was an integrative approach. I knew that we had to make sure that everybody felt valued. But I also knew that as much as I was serving the Black community, and I use that term across the diaspora, I also knew that I had brown children who were accessing my setting. And by brown, I'm referring to children who have got South Asian heritage. I also knew that the British Southeast and East Asian community were accessing my setting, specifically the Vietnamese community. I knew that at any time, throughout the time that I was there, I'd have one or two white British children, but the white children that I had were commonly Polish. So I knew that there was a level of kind of marginalization that all of those communities faced when they came to Edgbaston Park Day Nursery, but there was something that I always ensured happened, and it was this pedagogy. The pedagogy of anti-racist practice in the early years. And it's something that I devised, and it's something that I developed, and it's something that I speak about when I'm delivering my training, my webinars, my courses, I'm facilitating or I'm hosting, because I need everybody to get this, because this is something that we did and it was normalized. It was embedded with what we did. So thinking about my own legacy, who I am in terms of my identity within this setting, what this setting means to me, that it isn't just a job. This is part of my family business, that I knew that feeding into that, there had to be a clear level of involvement within the ecosystem that would allow my setting to operate. And I also knew throughout that time, when I was doing what I was doing, there was a transition happening for me personally, in that I got married to a man called Mr. Pemberton, and his family's legacy also sat within my pedagogy. So it was an intertwining of the personal and the professional, because that is what it is about. So embrace, embed, ensure, extend. These are the 4 E's. To embrace all children's racial, cultural, and religious backgrounds, and not in a tokenistic way, okay? Not because I am not Vietnamese, am I not going to celebrate the culture, the diversity, the richness that the children from that community would come in and bring. I would ensure that these things happened all the time. All of the practice that we did, it was culturally sensitive. It placed the child as the expert. The families and the children were the experts. They were coming to inform us. And similarly, when we're thinking about Black children, I'm thinking about how we listen to, how we ensure that the value of their funds of knowledge are recognized within our settings. And also being aware of how many Black owned, Black managed early years settings there were in Birmingham at that time. Embedding a culture of belonging amongst practitioners and children. Everybody needs to feel like they're part of the squad, they're part of the team. And my team felt that over the years. I had 3 amazing deputies. I had people in that team who would have done anything to ensure that those children got the best experience because it meant something to them. And that team wasn't all Black. That team was a multitude of ethnicities. It was a multitude of cultures, a multitude of languages that was spoken and brought in. And so I wanted to make sure everybody felt like they belonged, and that it was embedded within that kind of sense of just feeling like they're in the team. And extending learning opportunities. So showing interest and expanding conversations, using diverse resources. Yes, it's really been popularized now. Everybody's realizing the need to get a Black doll. Everybody's realizing that, you know, Black History Month is in October in the UK. I always said that Edgbaston Park Day Nursery, Black History Month was 365. It was always happening because it was at the core of what we did. So when I think about pedagogy and I think about how we're introduced to how children learn, I think about what is embedded within the curriculum. I think about what's embedded within early years training and preparation. And I also think about what the regulatory bodies are looking for. It's important to say at this time that during my management of Edgbaston Park Day Nursery, we were outstanding. As judged by Ofsted, we were inadequate. We were requires improvement. We were good. We were whatever the weather said. However that inspector felt on that day. What I quickly came to realize is that the validity of the inspector meant nothing to me. The validity of the inspector meant nothing to the children and families. What was most important was how those children left feeling and how we centralized, as I said, culture, ethnicity, race, and how we made sure that that was at the core of what we did. It was truly something to behold, something that I think of very fondly. And as I transitioned out of that physical space last year, March, and I'm able to bring this to lots of different nurseries, lots of different local authorities nationally, the work is coming through thick and fast because people need to hear it. Thank you very much. The last slide is just contact details. So I really appreciate you all listening and enjoy the rest of this conference.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was a wonderfully energetic presentation. And I know that there are questions in the chat. And as Rebecca said at the beginning, we may run out of time in terms of being able to answer your questions, but we found a fabulous way of us actually answering your questions and answering them well. In that what we would do is to send you a slide deck with an audio embedded, where you get a proper full answer to your question. So don't worry if we actually don't, if we kind of run out of time in the session. Liz, that was superb. Thank you so much. I'm going to go on now to introduce our second speaker. And I can see, okay, right. It was me putting my own hand up. I was just going to say, I could see somebody putting, it was me, my cursor putting my own hand up. Anyway, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. And it gives me great joy to introduce Sonia Thompson to you. So as I said, we're looking at Birmingham practitioners. And Sonia Thompson is head teacher at St. Matthew's C of E Primary Teaching Research School. She's also a Talk for Writing lead trainer. Some of you will be familiar with Sonia and her story, as she appeared in The Guardian last year in an article that was about 3 ways to improve race relations in schools. Sonia promotes, and I know that she'll talk about it, similarly to Liz, a knowledge-rich curriculum that really recognizes the communities that she serves as being deep repositories of knowledge wealth. And that's one of the things that I love about Sonia. But here's one of the things that you probably won't pick up from Sonia's profile. I know Sonia as a leader of moral purpose, and I'm going to embarrass her now. Sonia joined 6 other Black women several years ago to save an historically Black school that was earmarked for closure in Birmingham. At least 4 of those women are also on this call. Paulette Osborne, Ava Sturridge Packer, and Charmaine Warmington, I believe, are also on this call, on this webinar this evening. And I can personally tell you that Sonia worked 16-hour days over a 12-month period to not only bring that school back from the brink of extinction, but also managed to work alongside her then head, Paulette Osborne, Superwoman, to get an outstanding Ofsted for their own school at exactly the same time. And let me just say this about moral purpose. It would have been in the interest of Sonia Thompson to let that small school close, because had it closed, she could have benefited from all of those children transitioning to her school and then increasing her schools to be a larger form entry school. But that's not where this girl's coming from. That's not where this woman's coming from. They chose a different way. And so it gives me tingles really to introduce Sonia Thompson. She's a legend who has my deepest respect. And I'm going to hand over to Sonia now.
Wow, thank you so much, Rosemary. Gosh, when you talk about legends, I always think of you. So it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here speaking to everyone. I have got some slides, so I'm hoping that they will be shared.
Sonia, it's just Rebecca here. As soon as I've got them, we'll get them up on the screen, okay? I'm just working on it at the moment.
I'll start talking. So inspiring to hear from Liz. And literally, I don't need to say anything because Liz has spoken so articulately about some of the key messages that I am going to talk about as well. In terms of our context, St Matthew's is an inner city school. We're a one-form entry school serving about 210 children. We're in an area of substantial deprivation. In Ofsted speak, we're in the 5th quartile, 3rd most deprived in Britain, 5th in Birmingham. And when you look at our pupil premium figures and the data around our school and around our school context in Neachels, then we always get this thing that, oh, you work in Neachels. Oh, okay then. But I have to say, and Rosemary talked about Paulette as well, I have to really celebrate Paulette as being a real model for what we try to bring to St Matthew's. And the thing that we brought was this idea that it doesn't matter that we're in Neachels. It doesn't matter where we are. It doesn't matter where children are born. Our role as Black educators, as educators, is to make sure that we're at the area where the children is born is not their legacy, but it is the starting point. And what we do is build that. Our children are never deficit. And there is a talk, the commentary around schools that are in areas of high deprivation, where deficit and disadvantage go together. Well, at St Matthew's, we try to break that chain. And regardless of what others say, Our legacy was to say to our children that their capital, their existing capital, matters. And it was our mission to make sure that our curriculum, throughout our curriculum, we had opportunities to build on what they brought to the table. And we didn't shut the door on our children's heritage, on our family's culture, on where they came from, on where they were going to, but celebrated that as a rich repository of what they had to bring to us. And actually, we were humbled by what we were able to gain from our children and their families, and at the same time, what we were able to give back to them. So you can see on the screen just a little bit about us as a school. And as I said, what being in an area of high deprivation allowed us to do was to motivate ourselves. When I started at St Matthew's 10 years ago with Paulette, we didn't have any kind of accolades, but we went on to gain a lot, whether they mean anything or not to anybody else. They were a marker for us that others were seeing, that 2 Black leaders, a Black head and a Black deputy, were able to achieve as highly as everybody else. And we wanted to really, really promote that. And in fact, we've continued that with me now as the head teacher and a Black leadership team alongside Black, brown, white teachers who work alongside us and bring passion to the work that we're doing for our children in Nechells. The beauty of what we're able to do now as a teaching school and as a research school is that we can move our ideas around children's culture and their heritage as being the driver for change, that schools really need to tune into funds of knowledge and make sure that actually you don't close the door on your children as bringing something to the table, but you open that door and allow that culture and heritage to come in and shape what you do as a school. And until schools who serve a large Black population are able to do that, they miss a trick. They miss an opportunity for that reciprocity, for that respect that we then are able to build on and build children's knowledge and move it forward. When I always talk about these things, I always present myself as the model for it, because one of the things that I like to talk about is refer, and Liz mentioned it, she talked about Louis Molle's funds of knowledge. And I love to talk about Louis Molle because as a researcher, he really, really epitomizes my beliefs and our beliefs as a school around this idea that our communities hold knowledge and power and heritage, and it's so rich, the histories, the truths around the histories of what we created and what we hold as our legacies need to be brought into our schools. So Louis Molle talks about the fact that understanding these funds of knowledge as practitioners, as educational practitioners, opening the doors for them and letting them into our schools will build the additional knowledge, the powerful knowledge that Michael Young talks about, that we want children to learn. So it is about that, as I said, that reciprocity. So in my school, we talk about the backpack that children have, this invisible backpack that they carry into school, that often when they bring this backpack into school, teachers tell them to take it off and throw it into the corner, dash it into the corner, because we're not interested in your invisible backpack. It's not what we want to hear about. We're the knowledge holders, we're the power holders, and actually we want to educate you. So don't bother to tell us about you. We'll tell you about what we want to tell you about. And we very much are about breaking that chain. We're not about that language. We're not about that talk when it comes to educating children. We're about the fact that actually you're rich, you're strong, you're powerful, your legacy is about potential. And actually, as educators, we're going to support you to unlock that potential. So as I said, I always start with myself and I talk about my funds of knowledge. I'm from a family of 10 children from one of the poorest areas in Birmingham. But what we lacked in money, We made for in love, in a strong religious background, with a parents that educationally didn't have much, but had the strong wish for their children, each and every one of their 10 children, to do well. And they drilled that into us. Regardless of the racism that we faced, they said, you have a storehouse, you have a backpack, you have heritage, you have culture, you have a legacy. And they drilled and drove that into us. So if my teachers had taken the time to open my backpack, they would have found somebody who loved reading, who was able to recite the Bible inside out, the stories, the knowledge of that rich culture of biblical texts, would have been able to recite it back to teachers. They would have found somebody who had a strong oral tradition, who read those airmail letters aloud. Greetings in the precious name of Jesus, our soon coming King, how keeping, hope fine. And then my grandma would reel off what's happening in Jamaica. And we would sit around as a family and enjoy those stories. And they would be our legacy and heritage. You would have found parents who packed us off on a Saturday and sent us off to the Moseley Road Library, if you know Birmingham, and we went swimming and we took our 8 books and we came back home and we read those books inside out. They would have found a culture and a heritage. But unfortunately, the 2 schools that I went to said to me, take off your backpack and throw it into the corner. So what my legacy is for the children at St. Matthew's is that you don't have to do that at my school. We're going to open that backpack with you and with your parents, and we're going to hear about your culture, about your heritage, about what matters to you, about where you come from, and what makes you you, and we're going to build it into our curriculum. So we call it the R curriculum. We start off with our lives, our families, where we can share it. We move on to our community, where we find out about Nechells. And actually we tell them that this being here in Nechells, it's rich. There's a history in Nechells. There's a history of people coming to settle in Nechells and move forward and do great things. What is that history? We then go on to find about the world, and we teach them about the Kemets and the Egyptians and what our legacy and heritage is, the Hispanolas, where they traveled and they from Haiti, and the uncovering of societies, and not just about Christopher Columbus, but about the truths of history. We teach our children about our global village and the place that we have within that global village. We teach them about our passions and who is passionate, who have been our strong, black, brown, passionate people who have made a change in our world. And then we teach them about our final topic is our future. And as educators, we talk about where we've come from and what has placed us in the position of having the honor and the privilege of standing in front of you to educate you. And that's our journey as Black educators, and that's our future. So that is what we try and drive forward within our school. And as I said, it's an honor and a privilege to be a Black educator and have the platform to be able to celebrate and talk about it as often as I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I hope you can see the applause that you're getting across the piece. Before I hand over to Graham so that he can introduce our final speaker, Ken Morris, I'm hoping that people can see the general thread in terms of excellence and in terms of Black excellence, actually, and the importance of building on legacy, and the importance of us shifting the conversation, and shifting the conversation in 2 ways. And this is what Graham and I wanted to do through these webinars. Shifting the conversation in terms of the narrative around disadvantage and underachievement with regards to African Caribbean children in British schools. That narrative no longer holds sway in places like Liz's school, Sonia's school, or Ken's school. And so any schools in 2021 who are still sending out the kind of data that Graham generates in his graphs are choosing to do so. They are choosing not to make a difference with African Caribbean youngsters. They are choosing not to build on the good practice that is out there. And that's the narrative that we are going to shift. For every one of the speakers that we've invited, we could have invited 10, 15, 20 more across Britain, Black and white, who are swimming against the tide, and Asian, who are swimming against the tide with regards to those children who are being failed by the British education system. So we're shifting that narrative, man, and picking up that backpack. Graham, over to you, please.
Thanks, Rosemary. I'm delighted to introduce our third inspirational speaker, Kendrick Morris OBE. Ken started teaching in 1978. And I first encountered him when he was the head and subsequently executive principal of Hamstead Hall. I met him at a conference actually that some of his staff had come to that I was organising, where the keynote speaker was an Australian academic called Jim Martin, who's done a lot of work on how you can ensure that all pupils have the language, the academic language they need to succeed in school. And Kent's school was the school that was actually doing Jim Martin's theory in practice. I was absolutely stunned by what was happening across the school. So it gives me huge pleasure to introduce Ken, who I'm trying to unmute. Yep, thanks, Ken.
Got it?
Okay, and I will find your slides for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. And good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for taking the time to come out and to share what has been so far an important feature of young people's education and really building and making a difference to their learning. Now, before I start, I think we ought to celebrate Yvonne Connolly. Now, Yvonne Connolly was the first Black female head teacher who unfortunately died pretty recently at the age of 81. So as we're celebrating achievement and excellence, it's worth just reflecting on this lady who had many challenges, and she's left a massive legacy, having mentored a number of people, and her legacy remains in the schools that she worked in. So bear a thought and remember the name, Yvonne Connolly. Right, one of the first things I want to talk about is the authentic voice of the leader. And I ought to say that I'm no longer an executive principal. I retired a few years ago. And in one sense, what I'm giving to you this evening is the benefit of my experience, having led Hamstead Hall School, and the legacy that's left for the young people and for the staff. When I first took up my headship appointment, 2006, something like that, one of the key things about any message and any authenticity of the leader is, in fact, the mission statement that that school has. Because that mission statement drives the direction of the school. And our mission statement was success for all through hard work and harmony. Now, you might say to yourself, well, everybody's got that kind of message, that kind of mission statement. But I would question that, because success for all genuinely means to me that everybody needs to have access to that success. Doesn't always mean A stars, but it's success in what they can achieve and what they can do. And that also breeds success for staff, because staff need to believe that in themselves and also in the young people. And the way that we were channeling that success was through hard work and harmony. Hard work is obvious. That's what all schools believe. The harmony for us was the important thing. We had children from a whole range of backgrounds, from South Asian backgrounds, we had children from the Caribbean, we had children from Africa, we had children from Europe, children from England. And therefore it's important in that school that all those children felt part of it, and all those children saw the need to work together and to value each other. And so when we look at where we were going as a school, it was important, obviously, to realise that the issues for us will be around agenda, the issue for us will be around race, and the issue for us will be around class or deprivation. And the key thing for us when we first started at Hamstead Hall was saying to ourselves, what is it that we need to do to make sure that children can achieve that success? What have we got to do, bearing in mind we're taking children from the primary school and we've got to take them forward to some successful outcomes. And the key thing for us was aspirations. Pupil student aspirations. And therefore, when we look and we think about that, as a school, we had several strategies, and I'm talking about over a number of years. So often, I think, in schools, we look for a quick fix. We look to what can we put in place to improve things here? What can we put in place in year 10 to make sure the children can get those grades in year 11? And in reality, there's foundations that need to be put in place. Foundations that you build on and you build on that ultimately will lead to the success. And for us, this aspiration was so key. And we looked at a number of areas. I'll look at GESA in a minute and the 3 L's and the language work that Graham mentioned and the mentoring program. So they all linked together. But our key starting point was this GESA, not GESA, but GESA. Because GESA stood for global, I'm trying to think, could you flick onto the next slide? I've just had a blank moment. Global Institute, that's it, Global Institute for Student Aspirations. And it was linked with America and the Endicott College. And it was linked to the sports school and the sports college that we were part of at the time. And the key thing to this GESA was around how can we ensure that students have high aspirations of themselves. And if we move on to the next slide, you'll see exactly what that involves. And you can see how this was driven forward. Because what was crucial, and I know Liz mentioned this, that if we want our students to achieve and to aspire, then in that organisation, there needs to be a sense of belonging. The children need to feel belong. They need to feel that they belong in that organisation. So when we look at underachievement, we need to be looking at, do those children feel as if they belong? And that's 1 of 8. I won't look at all of them. I'll just pick a couple more. Heroes. Who are the heroes in these children's life? Do they see their teachers as heroes? Do those children feel in that organisation that they're experiencing a sense of accomplishment, or is always negative? And just picking up the last couple there, leadership and responsibility. Are the children given the opportunity to lead and be responsible, or they're suppressed? Are they given the opportunity to develop their confidence that they can take action, or do they feel diffident? And in one way, how we moved forward with this was through a number of questionnaires that we asked every single student in the school along those 8 areas. And the school got a wealth of results back from that. And it was quite scary for the teachers, because here the teachers are looking at information that the children were talking about them, about the lack of accomplishment, the lack of heroes in the school. And then it became a foundation for which the children could build on. And we've got a whole list of questionnaires that tick those boxes, so to speak, but now is not the time to go through that. And the next slide, please. Because we also realised within our context, what was important was the fact that we had children who were EAL children. And the other thing that we don't talk much about from the Caribbean community is the fact that teachers, educators who are non-Black sometimes see Black children as just having the language of English. And therefore they think that the children shouldn't have any language development issues, when in fact sometimes in the home they're speaking Patois, and Patois isn't quite the same as English. And therefore when you look at this slide, it's quite important, because we felt in a lot of the developments of young people, they haven't achieved this academic English necessary to achieve the high grades at GCSE level and at A level. They were good at getting grade C's, but they couldn't then push on to get those higher grades. And when you look at this path, this journey, it all makes sense. Because if you're English only speaking pupil from an academic background, you're well down that road. If you're an EAL pupil from an academic background who have first language literacy skills, you're the next one. And if you're an only English speaking pupil from a non-academic background, then you're the next one in terms of that journey. And the last one there, you can see quite clearly that an EAL pupil from a non-academic background who has no literacy skills in their first language, they're right at the back. And a lot of the young people in Birmingham, and certainly in our school, were coming from that area, and it was important that we could build on that. And as a whole school, we had a whole school approach where every single subject embraced this. It took a while, but they embraced it, and they were looking at language in their subject and developing language in their subject to improve the English in their subject and improve the children's understanding. So when we talk about arguments, what's the structure necessary to perform an argument in history, geography, and all the other subjects? So it wasn't an English department's issue, it was indeed a whole school issue. And we had, on a regular basis, Friday morning, inset, banging this point home. And so finally, as we just come back, I want to just pick briefly on this underachievement. If you look at the red area, what it's saying is who, from the gender's perspective, are underachieving? Boys. Who from the race are underachieving? African Caribbean. Who from the class are underachieving? Those who are disadvantaged. And therefore, the danger is, if we're not careful, we can see that if you're probably a disadvantaged person from an African Caribbean background and you're a boy, you're going to struggle. However, if you've got the aspirations right within the school and the support right within the school, and the children feel as if they belong in the school, and you've got the mentoring programs to support them in the school, and more importantly, you've got the parents working with you because they believe in what you are trying to do for their child. Bearing in mind, some of them have had bad experience in education. Then there's hope and there's joy. And finally, on my final slide, just wanted to come back, not just to the students' aspirations, because if the organisation doesn't think about the teacher aspirations, then the school isn't going to get there. And so we also need to think about those key areas for our staff, that they feel as if they belong, that they've got their eras, that they're given a sense of accomplishment, that they can have fun and excitement, that they can have the opportunities to lead, and they can have confidence to take action. And in one sense, that's how we move forward, and that's how we, over the years, have managed to ensure that our boys, our students, our girls of all ethnicities have achieved well and managed to buck the trend, particularly with Afro-Caribbean children. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I think that's really good in just a very short space of time. I think you said everything that every secondary school head teacher in the country needs to know. They get our heads around all of that, we'll not have underachieving groups, because we'll make sure everybody has a chance. So thank you so much for that. We're coming up to 5:10. We're due to finish at 5:15. I'm trying very quickly to scan through the questions, and I can't see many. I just see people saying to every single one of our speakers, thank you, that was inspiring. Have we got any questions?
Yes.
Ken's got a question.
No, I just noticed a question that's come on about African children. I'm not sure whether you can see that. And
yeah.
I'll just see whether I can pick
that
up. I'm not sure whether anybody.
Diane, why do
Did you read that?
Because
I believe it's all to do with the history. Because if you look at African children, really, their history is one of, if I say stability, I think you'll know what I mean when I'm going to explain. There's been no issue of being taken out of their country. There's been no issue of this whole idea of slavery. And therefore, in one sense, they have a pretty tight structure. And the families are there, and there's a pretty tight structure across the piece. And this is just my view from what I've seen and one or two other things. Whereas the African Caribbean, their journey has been quite challenging. Their journey has been one of slavery. Their journey of one of being separate. Even in the islands, you look at the islands, it's Jamaica, it's St. Kitts, it's Barbados, and they're all almost competing against one another, or don't always seem to come together. The only thing that brought the communities together was the cricket, the West Indies cricket, where everybody was seen to be, we're the West Indies. Whereas there's always sometimes this difference. And I think in one sense, if there was more, I say unity in terms of all of us working together, I think there's a lot of history behind this that has caused perhaps the struggles, if you like, for the African Caribbean community as opposed to the African community. I mean, I welcome somebody else's views, but I think that's part and parcel of the answer to that.
I think Ken is right in terms of that's part of the answer. I think another part of the answer is to focus on how the system interacts with different groups, as opposed to those different groups and how they behave within the system. So as I was reminded by a primary specialist the other day, when we were talking about underachievement, she was a primary specialist, and she reminded me that you can have an African Caribbean boy and an Asian girl who at key stage 2, or at the beginning of their teaching, their education within the primary sector, would be coming in with exactly the same levels of attainment. And on the basis of their gender and their race, they would be predicted different outcomes at the end of key stage 2. So even if those two kids started off at the beginning, I'm getting a bit of an echo, I'm not sure why, but I'm hoping it's not disturbing to other people. So even if those two kids who started at exactly the same attainment, then were predicted, because people are trying to adjust their predictions to balance out the fact that African Caribbean boys, for example, are historically underachieving. So the predictions will be different for those two kids. So at key stage 2, at the end of key stage 2, they can still come out with exactly the same attainment, And the Asian girl would be seen to be achieving and overachieving, but the African Caribbean boy, because of the differential in terms of what he was predicted to achieve, is seen as underachieving. So sometimes we have to get under the figures.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right about that, Graham, or am I not?
Well, one of the things we shared at the last webinar was the figures across ages. And what the figures tell us is that African Caribbean pupils, according to the early years data we have, come to school pretty much as well prepared as anybody. So they're in the right place. So if they're then not succeeding 7 years later, I think the question has to be about the school rather than the children and the community that they come from. And it's very, very stark. Sorry, I can't show that again now. And then it gets worse as well. And the attainment gaps get bigger the further you go through the system. So by GCSE, they're even further behind. But I think we have to be very clear that if they come to school ready for school, what happens at school is an issue that we have got to address, because it's not their fault. It's what we do in schools.
Precisely, Graham. And so many of the interventions have been in terms of family and culture and raising self-esteem and all of that, and not looking at what happens within the system. Somebody's just said in the chat, apparently software used to predict to give predictions have algorithms that factor in names and ethnicity. And yes, they do. And postcodes, by the way. That's why we got into such a mess up with GCSE last year. So the class element comes in as well. So this perception that, you know, if we move to an algorithm, it's neutral. Who sets the algorithm? Who sets the algorithm? The bias is built in. The bias is built in for class, it's built in for gender, and it's built in for ethnicity. So, you know, we have to become quite sophisticated about navigating this space and having these discussions about underachievement and how inequity is built into the system, unless you have leaders like Ken and Sonia and Liz that say, well, it doesn't have to be this way. It actually doesn't have to be this way. And it hasn't been this way in their schools for nearly over a decade. So actually there is a way of us going against that tide, but I just think that we have to be a lot less naive, a lot more political, and we have to get under the data that says that it's about focusing on the children and their families. It's about changing and shifting them as opposed to focusing on the system. One last thing from me, and Jackie Ranger, amongst many other legends, is on this call, so she can back me up on this. Aiming High was an initiative that I was one of 7 consultants, Black consultants, who were leading on in terms of African Caribbean youngsters around about 2003. And I can tell you for sure that the schools that I was the consultant to, there were some schools who were wringing their hands and saying, oh, you know, none of our African Caribbean boys, because I was in secondary, none of our African Caribbean boys are getting a higher grade in GCSE maths. And they'd be wringing their hands and thinking about what can we do culturally, how can we make the maths curriculum more? And then I had a conversation with the heads of the maths department and asked, where are the Black boys placed? How do you actually set in terms of maths? And they would always say, we set on ability. In our structured meeting, that's what they'd say. Then I'd sit in the staff room and I'd hear staff saying, Ken doesn't deserve to be in top set maths. So although the official policy is that we set as regards to attainment, The unofficial policy, the real policy that runs in that school, is that Ken is not going to be in top set maths because there's an issue with his behavior, or there's a perception of challenge. So then right across these schools that we were running, we were part of Aiming High, we could see that they weren't putting the boys in to higher tier GCSE. The tier that they were putting them in, lower tier, the highest grade that they could get was a D. And then they'd be scratching their heads at the end of it and saying, I wonder why African Caribbean boys aren't getting higher grades in maths. That's just one subject. Inbuilt within the system, systemic racism that ensures that this underachievement narrative continues until you get heads like us who are saying, hell no, it doesn't have to be this way. And there are some very, very simple, quick fixes. That's me, Graham.
Thank you, Rosemary. And I think all three of our presenters on leadership have told us that there are some things that are hard work and take a long time, but there are some things that are simple. And just believing in your pupils is the start. There's no reason why they can't all succeed. If you start from that place, you can make it happen. If you don't start from that place, do you think they're going to fail for a reason that's you attribute to their background quite wrongly? You let them down. It just reminds me, my first year of teaching, you know what happens in your first year in a secondary school. As the young teacher, you get the bottom sets and you get to go and watch your head of department teach. So you can see what good looks like. What I remember from that is who was in the bottom set that I was teaching and how different the top set looked when you went to see who was there. It's extraordinary. So this is a long-standing problem, but we do these webinars because we believe it doesn't have to be like that. There are inspiring people such as our speakers today who've shown us it doesn't have to be like that. And the more we spread the word that it doesn't, the more likely we are to make a difference. So thank you all very much for coming. Thanks especially to Sonia, Ken and Liz, and to Rosemary, whose idea it was in the first place that we should do things like this. We are planning to do another one in April. And this time we're going to try and look at curriculum. And what is it about our curriculum that maybe doesn't favour everybody in the same way? We will send you the recording out. I hope that the little glitch at the start hasn't lost too much. But I can't tell you till I've looked at it. But I think we've probably caught the start of Liz. So from then on, we're okay. And thank you all again so much for coming. It will take us a while to do the recording because, as Rosemary said, we might do some voiceovers about questions, which will just take us a while to do. But it will get to you. And we hope to see you all again in, we think it'll be April when we look at the curriculum. So thanks very much and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you all. See you soon again.